Social Security Fund. He has 14 years of experience ranging from academia, telecom, FMCGS, he will tell us what that means later, and pension sector. He really has worked for a number of local and multinational organizations in various capacities. He's worked as a lecturer in the Islamic University in Uganda. He's a senior manager of learning and development for Coca-Cola. He's also been a senior manager learning and development for MTN and a facilitator on executive programs in the MAT Abacus. Abdul holds a degree in development studies, and he has a master's in business administration, specializing in HR and marketing at from Bangalore University. He also has attended numerous leadership programs from the Gordon Institute of Business Science, University of Pretoria, and Strathmore Business School, and he's also a certified talent practitioner. Abdul is also an IFC certified trainer and has delivered training workshops in human resource and marketing for several clients within the region. So I would like to welcome both of you to your presentation. So I will hand over now to Caroline. If you can now upload I think you have some slides. Caroline will speak to us for 10 minutes, and then Abdul will follow that with another 10 minutes, and then we will have our Q&A. I will start off with the Q&A, and then we'll have all our participants join in. Thank you very much. Caroline, are you okay? I think you're...
Yes, I was on mute, but I'm now okay. And good morning and good afternoon. If it's still morning, I think it should be afternoon where most of you are, but for some of you, it may still be morning. And welcome to this session. I have a few minutes to share my take on what's happening now with regard to training, talent, and technology trade-offs. So let me just get right into it. So just trying to get my controls right. Okay, wonderful. So what we're going to look at in my presentation is what life was like those 9 or so months ago, what the L&D landscape looked like before COVID. Then we're also going to look at the current technology landscape and some of the strategies that are being adopted by organizations. And in addition to that, we'll also look at what's happening in terms of how the changes right now are impacting organizations. We'll then next look at trade-offs for both facilitators and learners, and then we'll wrap up by looking at some key actions that we need to take for organizations and learning professionals. So let's go right into it, starting by looking at the Africa L&D landscape before COVID. So what used to happen? Largely training was face-to-face, and I know a lot of what I'm going to share has already been covered in the previous sessions, largely face-to-face, and then also as a result, largely trainer or facilitator-led. The learner would largely depend on the trainer or the facilitator to have the content which was then delivered to them. E-learning, some steps into e-learning had already begun, and this was being done in different ways. Some organizations were already doing it really well in tandem with the rest of the world, but in other places it was still very, very rudimentary. There was limited virtual events, and in some situations, workbooks were being used for self-paced personal learning. That all changed, of course, as we well know, in March when COVID hit Africa, and the rest of the world, of course, and very quickly we had to move and adapt, organizations and also learning providers as well. So some of the things we have seen is that there's been a steep change curve, which has involved everybody just needing to learn, adapt, shift immediately and very fast. And then also the workforce, workers have been actually separated. Many of us were forced to start working from home. There are some organizations that still had to work in the office, but not together. So there was a lot of change in terms of how working is happening, but there has been a decided shift to remote learning. E-learning is in the process of being enhanced. That hasn't been completed. And this is being done in different ways in different organizations. And now we are seeing a decided move to live virtual training. And many organizations, and including learning professionals, are beginning to invest in hardware to facilitate this. So laptops, and also cameras, lights, etc., and also platforms. And then there's been, in some spaces, a minimal resumption of face-to-face learning. But the impact of this on organizations, and this is from a number of articles I've read on the subject, is that they're actually seeing that, and many of them are actually saying that we should have done this earlier. Why? Because there's a lot of saving of time, because learning is happening faster. Financial savings has been huge because you no longer have to move learners. There's no need to provide meals, etc. So there's been a lot of saving in that way, and learning has still been able to proceed regardless. And so this is one main advantage that has been taken. And there's been a need to redesign learning experiences, and there's been a need to invest in several aspects: hardware, equipment, making sure that even though workers are at home, that they are properly equipped to learn, and then also platforms as well, needing to invest in platforms and also internet connectivity. So basically facilitating connectivity for all their learners. And it's not only for learning, but it's also being able to facilitate work. Yeah. So all this has really been some of the impacts that we've seen on organizations. Let's now look, and also Cindy Haggett, who writes an annual article that's entitled The State of Virtual Learning, said, despite its long history as a viable learning solution, virtual learning is still new for many organizations. She continues to say that we are moving into an era with virtual learning as the gateway to immersive learning experience. And I see this actually as an opportunity that presents itself to both organizations and learners, and of course to us as learning specialists, to enhance the learning experience in order to have higher impact. So let's look at the changing technology of the learning landscape and its impact on the learners. Learners, of course, have had to change, to shift from face-to-face to doing work and also learning virtually. There's been a need to adapt. They're also having to contend with learning apart from their colleagues, apart from their peers. So there's very often information exchange that happens when you're learning together physically. But now they've had to do that. But still, there's been room for collaboration, even though this has been virtual. Also, there's been more independent learning because with assignments sometimes in between virtual learning, you're forced to go and do the research and get more information, which then leads to higher retention of learning. So I've talked about the retention, but then there's also deeper learning. So you're learning actively, you're engaged with what you're researching, with what's going on with the learning. So there's deeper learning. And then still, as I said, you may be away physically from your peers, but there's still virtual peer learning opportunities. And many platforms are providing opportunities to engage and to collaborate together. So all these changes present gains and losses. So let's look at some of the gains and losses for learners. And you will notice that there are hardly any losses for organizations. But for the learners and for the learning specialists, I do cover both gains and losses. So some of the gains are that time is saved. You no longer have to travel from where you are to where the learning event is happening. There's also been a bit in relation to that, a bit of a financial saving if you are using your own finances to facilitate your travel. And then also you're learning at your own pace. So you schedule your time, you decide when it is you're going to engage with the learning, and you do so. Of course, this is not always available, especially if it's live learning, even though it's virtual. But there is time for that, especially if you're learning with standalone learning programs. Deeper learning, as I mentioned earlier, which leads to better internalization of the content of what you're learning. And of course, that in turn then leads to higher application at your workplace in the work that you're doing. And also there's an opportunity to connect still with the facilitators and also with your colleagues, but it's just being done in a different way, in a different space. Some of the losses to learners has been the isolation, particularly in the earlier days, getting used to no longer being with your colleagues, being able to turn around and talk and engage with them was an issue, but I think this is becoming less so now. And then also limited referral, but I say this with a pinch of salt, simply because I may not be able to refer to you in person, but I can pick up the phone, we can jump onto a Zoom call and still be able to engage and refer to one another. No in-person interaction. Some people have missed that. Some people really feel ready to go back. In fact, many have welcomed the different changes in terms of in terms of being able to engage with their colleagues, even though it's not as much as before. And of course, learning at home has its distractions, their pets, their children. There is Netflix and other distractions as well. So these are some of the losses that have presented themselves to learners. What about the impact on learning professionals? There's adapting to online delivery. We've had to do this, and by the way, it's not just us, but it's learning professionals across the world. I've been privileged to attend a number of webinars, and many of them were saying that now, they're having to change, they're having to upskill, and I've been also through the COLF program that's run by the LPI, and a lot of trainers, even in the UK, have not been through this. So we've all had to adapt. So don't think it's just happening in Africa. It's actually happening across the world, needing to adapt to online delivery, dealing with remote learners as opposed to learners who you can see and engage with physically. And then also, in relation to this, for those of us who've resumed learning, having to learn in a different way, no longer being able to see the faces of your learners because we are wearing masks, and not being able to engage as freely as you used to physically with them, touching and etc., simply because of the social distancing rules. Again, many learning professionals have had to convert content for online delivery, and have discovered that it's not just cut and paste. There's a lot of adaptation that needs to happen, and it's almost like having to do a redesign and a rethink of what you're delivering. There are opportunities, of course, to try new methods of learning delivery, and a need, obviously, for new skills. Indeed, it has been said that the learning professional has to be both a learning and a technology expert. And indeed, this is the case. So the gains for us as learning professionals is that there's an element of time being saved because virtual learning is delivered at a faster pace. A one-day program can very easily be condensed into 2 hours, or maybe just slightly more than that, with breaks, etc., and with a lot of the learning being taken out of the live event and being done offline by the learners themselves. There's also the financial saving in terms of traveling. Of course, for many of us who used to travel a lot, there's a bit of a relief that you don't have to travel and leave your family all the time. So there's also that benefit. We have had to continue learning, and I don't think that's a problem for any of us because we love to learn and we love to grow as well. There are opportunities to innovate, acquire new skills, and just have a wider reach. So instead of being limited geographically, now the whole world is at our feet, and we need to leverage on these gains and opportunities. Some of the losses have been development time, because what you find with online learning, there's a need to make very, very engaging slides. So you can't just slap together content that is heavy on text. You have to take time to really think through the journey, what you're going to include, especially if you are converting, what you're going to take out, and that takes time. And then there's also the pain, I must say, of being detached from your learners. But of course, this can be overcome by how you develop your online engagement with them and how you build the rapport and how you also remain connected even outside of the live training space. There's also the element of isolation, especially if you used to work in a team. Now you're having to work on your own. But I think for most of us, we've now overcome that psychological barrier of working, quote unquote, on your own. So the trade-offs that are available for both facilitators and learners when using technology to facilitate learning include the fact that all of us are learning, all of us are growing, all of us are adapting. We are still able to continue engaging with one another. And there's also continued engagement, yes, but also increased engagement, because for the learning to happen, then of course there are different touch points that we need to continue engaging, both in the live session and offline. There's more versatility. We can do more. We can be more as well. And obviously, there's an opportunity to try new things and to explore territory that we've not entered into before. So the opportunity for us is that, as outlined in a training magazine article that I read recently, is that organizations will need integrated platforms and advanced technologies that can support dynamic work, locations, and team collaboration. Having teams in different locations, some at home, some are in the office, some are in different regions, but having technologies that can actually support that. It goes on to say that training professionals then will need to use, and I may add effectively, use those platforms to train a blended workforce with diverse needs. So this is both a challenge and an opportunity, but I know as learning specialists, we are more than up to the task to rise to the occasion and meet the needs of leveraging on this opportunity. So what are some of the actions then that we need to take? Let's start by looking at actions for organization to embrace the change and to leverage on it. After that initial 1 or 2 weeks of the initial paralysis of adjusting to the restrictions, etc., then I think many organizations and moved straight away to embracing the change and seeing how to leverage on it. I know for many organizations this is still a work in progress, particularly the large organizations, but this is what needs to happen. Maintain strategic focus. Goals may have shifted, the landscape may be different, but we always need to be focusing on strategy and find the best learning and development solution for your business, for your organization. Collaborate with the L&D department, with the teams that are involved in developing people, and start adapting to the change. And then make the necessary investments in technology on the 3 levels I talked about: equipment and hardware, platforms and other software to support the learning in these platforms. This including learning management systems, making sure that they're robust, that they're able to support the new initiatives that you're engaging in, as well as platforms for delivering this. They're not always part of the LMS. They might actually be separate, but just making sure that they are robust and able to deliver, and also making sure that that your learners, your trainers have the connectivity needed to ensure that learning using technology is happening as seamlessly as possible. Other actions for organizations are for them to support learners in adapting to the new space, the working space, and of course also the learning space, the learning platforms, being comfortable with the technology, and also providing robust technological support in terms of during the sessions and also outside of the sessions, navigating the platforms, etc. One important consideration is also for organizations to make sure that there is cybersecurity provided for both trainers and for learners, that they can learn in a safe and secure environment without the fear of hacking and other interferences that we've seen on some platforms. actions for us as learning professionals is for us to embrace the change, upskill, so develop our virtual design skills and our virtual delivery skills. As I said earlier, we need to be technology and design experts, and we need to make sure that as we do in face-to-face learning, we are creating memorable and yet impactful learning experiences for our learners. We need to provide support to the learners, both live and also offline, and collaborate and share. All of us as learning professionals, we are on a learning curve, and we need to be sharing as we are on this conference, but also in other platforms as well. So that brings me to the end of my presentation, where we looked at the Africa pre-COVID, which sounds like a whole lifetime away, current strategies that are being adopted to navigate this disruption, and then also the changing technology landscape and its impact on organizations, on learners, and also on learning specialists, professionals, and the trade-offs that this presents, and finally the actions that organizations, learners, and learning specialists need to take to leverage on this. And so some of the questions that I think are for consideration: number one, what has your personal experience been? It's good to take time to just process and think about these things. Also, how do we leverage on the opportunities and navigate the limitations? And finally, then, having answered the first two questions, how then do we move forward as learning professionals, able to support the organizations that we are working with to achieve their strategic and performance objectives with excellence and with as much efficiency as possible. So there's a couple of resources that I will share just right away once my presentation is done. But one is the article I referred to, The State of Virtual Learning, Virtual Training, an amazing article, very short with a useful infographic that you'll be able to use. And then from Training Industry, The Post-COVID Future of Work and its Impact on Learning and Development. So I'll pop those into our chat box as soon as I'm done. So allow me to wrap up with a quotation by John F. Kennedy. He said, "Change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future." And I know none of us wants to miss the future. It's been a pleasure doing this presentation, and I look forward to the discussion we're going to have very shortly. And now I hand over to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for that insightful presentation. I think as well.
Oh, I was talking.
Oh, so you're on mute.
Oh, okay. I sorry, this is technologic. I'm from a baby boom. I have another mic on. So Robert, thank you. Caroline, thank you very much for an insightful presentation. And I think you have given us food for thought for the actions that you have told us that we need to think about. And what I really enjoyed is at the end where you have given us some questions to think about. But before we do that, we will move to Abdul. And Abdul, are you ready? And listen to your presentation, and then we move on. Abdul, are you ready? Okay.
Hello. Let me just share my screen.
Okay.
All right.
Are you okay? Do you need any help?
It's still loading.
Okay.
Yeah.
Robert, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, whilst Abdul is loading up, I think that maybe, are there any questions? Did somebody pop any question in there? We could
Yes,
probably listen to.
someone popped a question. I think it was Angela.
Okay.
Angela Mate was asking, employers are buying into virtual learning. However, the beneficiaries of the training, especially the SMEs, are not buying into it mainly because of fear of change, poor knowledge of use of the platforms, and data or network connectivity issues. How can we solve these problems and get buy-in from the beneficiaries? That's from Angela.
Okay. So, Angela, fantastic question. I think Caroline is still there, and I'll pop that to her. So maybe Angela, Caroline, maybe you'll be able to chat through that question while we are waiting for Abdul to load up.
Okay, I'll be happy to. I got the fear of change and the bitter issues. I think there was a third issue, wasn't there?
And this was actually for them, the SME. Yeah.
Yes, I got that as well. So I'm sorry I missed the third issue that was raised in terms of the reasons why. Yes, I'm a learning specialist, but I'm also an SME specialist. And yes, you're right. Many of them are reluctant to move, and I think a lot of it is because of just the culture we've had in Africa. When I go to learn, I go to school, right? I go where there's the teacher there or the trainer in front of me, and we learn together. And I was sharing this with a client of mine, one of the banks here that I've been working with, that many of them, even though they were offering webinars, not everybody moved or logged in simply because of the challenges of technology, which brings me to the point of you may want to have a session where you teach them how to use the technology, or earlier in your session, before the session goes live, encourage them to log in earlier and just help them to familiarize. I think, and this is not just limited to Africa, there will be some people who will avoid the technology or be afraid of the technology, etc. And I think we'll just have to accept that that's the reality on the ground, which is why we still may go back to offering live learning, but it's important for us at this point to encourage them to do it like that by offering the support that will help to facilitate that. So getting them to log in earlier, and of course, dealing also with the issues of technology. As a trainer, I've had to just make sure I have backups for almost everything. But I know we can't have a backup for electricity in many places. And so just navigating with those challenges that you have. But I think ultimately we might have to have parallel programs where we have the same program, but we have an online version of it for those who want it. But we also have a live one that is delivered in the way that it was done before. Thank you.
Caroline, thank you so much. I think Abdul, you're okay now?
Yes, I'm okay. I just had
Okay,
a technical glitch.
Okay, no problem.
And I like that Carol was talking about power that you don't have control over.
Well, one of the critical things is for us to do what? Adapt, right? So this is adaptation. Okay, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll just pick up from where she talked about what is changing and what do we need to look out for as L&D professionals. And when look at as L&D professionals,
We don't seem to have your slides. There we go.
So when I decided to look at what is changing in the L&D profession, I thought it would be fit for me to look at it from what is driving the technology change in the workplace from a learning perspective. And I looked at a few aspects that are actually forcing us to go where we are. Many of us have been talking about digitalization. Many of our companies have talked about digitalization, but we have not taken the next step. Until COVID turned up, we were forced to go to digitalization. We stopped simply making mention of it and decided to dive into it. And that is quite interesting that we have been talking about it. But I like the quote that was put across by Microsoft, which says that in order to survive in the world, companies need to rethink everything from culture to the environment and the tools they are using. A lot of the discussions today, we have talked about culture. We have talked about the learning culture. We cannot change ourselves until we understand how the culture impacts on what is happening around us. The next important point to look at is the exponential information growth. You'd realize that the skills are getting outdated as soon as you get them. In one of the interesting researches by Towards Maturity, they said that the half-life of the piece of knowledge today is just around 5 years. But just like we noticed from the discussion that we had with Ed, you'd realize that the knowledge is becoming obsolete in the shortest time possible. 5 was then. It may be even less than that. The other aspect that is very key for us to look at is the changing learning habits. You'd realize that in the study that was carried out by Towards Maturity in 2016, the sample space was 4,700 people plus. 4 in 5 know what they want to learn. So as the changing cultures change or the changing habits change, it becomes important for us as L&D practitioners to rethink and see how do we adopt to the changes. I'll show you some statistics that are quite interesting. 91% 91% of the learners already know what kind of learning they would want. They would want to pace themselves. 82% know what learning they need. If you look at the 68%, they know where to find the learning they need. 72 have a clear personal development plan. What does that mean from an L&D perspective? It means that we need to adopt to a training or to the technology that takes that into considerations. The learners have changed to a level of knowing where they need to find the material, but they also know what they need to learn. So any of the technology or the systems that we are using must take that into consideration. And those are strategies we need to look at from an L&D perspective, but also from an organizational perspective. If you move ahead, the other drivers of technology have also been the multi-generational workforce. You'd realize that 80% of your workforce is between Generation X and millennials. What is interesting about this group is that they keep on hopping from jobs to jobs, but also that means they need to keep on learning to survive in the industry in which they are or in the different jobs that they are performing. Just to suffice on that, the other point that is affecting technology that is similar to the multi-generational workforce, when you look at the emerging gig economy, stats have shown that one is estimated, the current students today are estimated to have done 10 jobs by the time they become 38. This is quite interesting. When I started employment, my mom had worked with one institution for close to 35 years. But in the period of 6 years, I've worked with 3 organizations. And when you tell her, she would ask you, are you mad? What is the problem? But that is the dynamics of the workplace, and that is how it's changed. When you look at the economy and the trends that are affecting technology, you'd also ask yourself, what are the strategies that the companies need to take on that would enable training become effective? One of the things you'd look at would be the micro-learnings. If you want people to learn on technology, you can no longer give them materials that take an hour or more than that. Research has shown that concentration levels are less than 30 minutes. So when you're picking an online system, if you're training online, you may need to look for micro-learning information that takes either 20 minutes or less than 20 minutes. The next aspect of strategy that would be very key for us would be learning on the go. I earlier said that the workforce is changing. As the workforce is changing, a lot of them are becoming digital savvy. So if the system cannot accept them to have learning on the go, learning from their phones or learning from their watches, then it becomes a bit difficult for them to take that into consideration. The other interesting aspect that companies need to adopt is gamification. People would want to get badges. If you look at platforms like the Josh Bassen Academy, They give those badges, and people like them. When you get a badge, you're motivated to do another course. The other strategy that we need to look at is the ability to curate personalized learning. Learning has gotten to a level that it's not all size fit it all. So you may need to look at particular people and what makes them motivated to learn. So do you have the ability to curate materials that are good enough for a particular individual? One of the other aspects that seems to have been lost because of the e-learning is the collaborative team-based learning. But technologies today can accept that to happen. For instance, as facilitators, we may decide to use trainings on Miro. Miro will provide a canvas where everyone around the world can write on the same canvas, and yet they are not in the same country. So the question there I would want to ask, as L&D professionals, have we taken time to think of what we need to do for our clients? Because we say we are customer-centric, but if we do not keep the learners at the forefront of the discussion, then we may not be effective enough to develop or to provide services that enable them to get to the next level. If you looked at the statistics in relation to social and collaborative learning, you'd realize that I was happy when the moderator talked about baby bloomers, but you'd also see that research has shown that the different categories of learners would want to figure out how best they can collaborate. So if, as a company, if you're adopting a learning system, then it must have the ability to collaborate with learners, bring in the social aspect. 67% of the Gen Z would want to have interactions. 50% millennials would want that. But also the baby bloomers who are not tech savvy, you'd realize that 45% of them would still want to have that ability to socialize during training. So it's key for us to think of the technology that we are adopting and how best it can take that into consideration. The other key aspect that I thought I would make mention of, in one of the reports by LinkedIn, 83% of the online learning happens during work weeks. So that cannot happen if you do not have micro-learning. But also what is interesting, the key interesting stats that you need to look at, 3/4 of each generation would want to learn stuff that is personalized to them. 80% of the Generation Z would want personalized learning. But also if you look at the end of the spectrum where you have the baby bloomers, they equally, 77% of them would equally want to have personalized learning. So as L&D professionals, how best can we personalize the training so that it's not generic? I thought in terms of the trade-offs, a lot of the trade-offs have been talked about by my colleague. But what I wanted us to look at more is the losses. The losses, if you look at the losses, one of the key losses we are talking about is human connection. But I've also said that as much as it's a loss in terms of the trade-offs, as organizations, if we cannot be adaptable to get systems that would bring about interaction, then this would become a showstopper. The second aspect is the technology challenges. These are on both sides. There is a very common sharing that has been going around on social media of the common terms that we have adopted ever since we got into COVID. Can you hear me? Am my slides showing on that side? So those are new terminologies that have been brought about simply because of technological challenges on both aspects, from a facilitator point of view, but also from a learner point of view. The distractions have been talked about. That is also impeding the whole aspect of training. But as a food for thought, what I thought about as we have been having these various discussions, for us to get to the next level, I thought that the quote of Alvin would take us where we want to be. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot unlearn, learn, and relearn. And this is very key for us as L&D professionals, but also on the value we put across from to our organizations. If we are not willing to agree and accept that times have changed, we may not even go back to the classroom setting that we enjoyed a lot. So the question there would be, do you have the ability to learn? Do you have the ability to unlearn? Do you have the ability to relearn. I thought that would be key for us as I conclude my conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we should give both, let's go to our discussion board and give both our presenters a shout, thanking them for what they've done. The amazing thing about both presentations that both of you came from different angles, and I think that there were so many key nuggets from here. Now, before we go on, I want to really do a time check. Robert, what is our time check now?
We have about 10 minutes.
We have 10 more minutes. Okay. So basically, I do have a few questions, but I think that being customer-centric, I would like for us to look at the questions that our participants have, and let's see how quickly we can go through them. And then perhaps I may get the questions that I have answered through that. So, Robert, we'll be listening to you. Let's take the first question.
Okay, thank you very much. We have Akofa asking a quite intriguing question. Akofa wants to know, how do we help our learners to transition fully into virtual classroom training sessions? What my experience has been is that we have learners signing in to participate in training sessions at the same time dealing with business requests and demands coming through, making it very difficult for them to be fully present during sessions. So how do they combine the demands on their business with the opportunity to stay in trainings? And that's from Akofa. We also have one from, we have another one from Tessima. He is asking, the youth can be effectively empowered to make best of technology and creativity to bring about practical solutions. I think that was a comment. Let me find the questions. I have one more question. How can organizations practically stimulate their employees to learn at their own pace? Any good examples in this regard? So there's one, there are a few more, so I'll let you answer the two, and then we can come back to the rest. Thank you.
Okay, Robert, thank you very much. So, Abdul, would you like to handle this? Okay. I think that, and I'm happy these questions are being asked because they are really aligned to what I had wanted to ask based on my experience of people not having full attention. So let's listen to you.
Thank you very much. In relation to the earlier question where you talked about learners being focused, we also need to understand that for L&D professionals to be successful in training, top management needs to have a buy-in. As top management, if you wake up and say that this is a training need and we think it's important, then you must be willing to let go of your employees for an hour or two, because that skill is key for the organization to get to the next level. It takes us back to what Tom earlier said in the morning session, where he said that if top management cannot come to the table, then a lot of the initiatives that L&D wants to put across would not be effective. So it's key that top management comes to the fold to enable that happen. So that is very key. But also the second one, where you ask that how do we get our employees to adopt to self-learning? I'll give an example of our institution. What has currently happened is our institution is fairly advanced compared to government stroke public institutions. You'd realize that we have adopted technology, and during COVID, our work continued as normal, and 80% of our staff are working from home. But what has been key for us to get our employees to get on self-learning has been that a lot of our work has changed to project-based. And that means that for you to be on a particular project, there are specific skills that you need to have. So that has become a driving force for them to acquire skills, to an extent that people call you and say, if this project comes about, I've attained this skill, would I be considered? So it's key that it's fully communicated that the workplace is changing. As the workplace is changing, that simply means that you also need to position yourself. But just to pick on the report that was put across by the World Economic Forum, they said that 85 million jobs would change. A lot of them would be displaced by machines. But also what is interesting in there, close to 97 new jobs would be related to the machine changes that have come across. And the question there would be, would you have the right skills to enable you enjoy on the 97 million jobs? So that has been one of the driving forces that has enabled most of our employees to embark on self-learning. Thank you very much.
Abdul, thank you so very much. I just want to make a comment on your initial response, which was related to getting buy-in. I believe that if I'm listening to the question, the buy-in has already been received. The delivery is being done. And the experience, and this I also experienced this year, you have people working from home and they log on so that you can be seen.